West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
The Second Circuit Court of Appeals just issued an order that is absolutely devastating to Donald Trump in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case, where Justice Arthur Engoron has not yet made a ruling. Justice Engoron says he's probably going to rule at the end of the month. But the ruling by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals that's devastating for Donald Trump actually doesn't involve Donald Trump. It involves Martin Shkreli. You remember the pharma bro who went to prison, who inflated the price of drugs like Daraprim, testified before Congress and invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Yeah, Martin Shkreli. So how did an order by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals involving Martin Shkreli that just occurred, how is that devastating news for Donald Trump in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case? Here's how. You see, New York Attorney General Letitia James filed a similar action that was brought against Donald Trump against Martin Shkreli, which led to a lifetime ban against Shkreli from ever being involved in the pharmaceutical industry in New York. It also carried with it a $60 million fine against Shkreli. The case was filed in the federal courts, not in the state courts. But the district court judge found that the Attorney General statute, the same one that was then later used against Donald Trump, but Executive Law Section 6312, provides the remedy that New York Attorney General Letitia James was seeking against Shkreli. So Shkreli appealed that to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Second Circuit Court of Appeals just affirmed the ruling by the district court, thereby affirming the validity of the statute which Donald Trump rails against, that New York Attorney General Executive Law Section 6312. New York Attorney General Letitia James, as she did against Shkreli, is seeking a lifetime ban against Donald Trump, not in the pharmaceutical industry, but in the real estate industry in New York. And the same way the New York Attorney General's office sought and got a $63 or $64 million fine against Shkreli, here, the New York Attorney General's office is seeking a $370 million fine against Donald Trump. And so as soon as the Second Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the federal district court's order that utilized New York Executive Law 6312, New York Attorney General Letitia James immediately sent a letter to Justice Arthur Engoron. And this really wasn't reported, although I want to give a hat tip to the Messenger who did report on this, Adam Klasfeld, who's been on top of it, and we've talked about it here as well when we talked about the closing argument that was given by New York Attorney General Letitia James's team. They cited the Shkreli opinion by the district court and noted that there was this appeal being taken as support for the use of this statute, so that if Justice Arthur Engoron was ever worried that his order, that Donald Trump was going to appeal his order through the New York state court system or through the federal courts and say it somehow violated some federal constitutional right or state constitutional right, there was this Shkreli precedent, this Shkreli authority, if you will. And now the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, granted it's in the federal system, not in the state court system. Ultimately, Donald Trump would be appealing this decision when it's handed down by Justice Arthur Engoron to the appellate division in New York, not the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But the fact that a federal circuit court of appeals, the Second Circuit, a very prestigious circuit court of appeals, is affirming executive law section 6312 in a very similar case, just a different industry, real estate versus pharmaceutical companies. Powerful support for the constitutionality, which I never doubted should be an issue, but nonetheless, Donald Trump's trying to create issues wherever he can. So let's take a look at this letter that was sent by New York Attorney General Letitia James immediately to Justice Arthur Engoron. But before doing so, I can't help but note the similarities between Shkreli and Donald Trump. This was Pharma Bro, Martin Shkreli, back in, I think it was 2016, when he testified before the House of Representatives. Watch what he does. Play this clip.
I want to ask you a few questions. What do you say to that single pregnant woman who might have AIDS, no income? She needs Daraprim in order to survive. What do you say to her when she has to make that choice? What do you say to her?
On the advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and respectfully decline to answer your question.
You were quoted as saying on Fox 5 in New York, you were quoted as saying, if you raise prices and you don't take that cash and put it back into research, I think it's despicable. I think you should not be in the drug business. We take all of our cash, all of our extra profit, and spend it on research for these patients, for other patients who have terrible life-threatening, life-ending diseases. Did you say that?
On the advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Do you think you've done anything wrong?
On the advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and respectfully decline to answer your question.
And remember when Donald Trump said that only the mafia takes the fifth, only mobsters, only criminals take the fifth? Play this clip.
Here's people taking the Fifth Amendment. 4 people plus the guy who illegally did the server. You know, he put in the illegal server. So there are 5 people taking the Fifth Amendment, like you see on the mob, right? You see the mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
And here's Donald Trump when he originally invoked his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination in the New York Attorney General civil fraud case. He later testified on cross-exam and not on direct examination, but this was Donald Trump's testimony in his deposition. Play the clip.
For all of the above reasons, I respectfully decline to answer the questions under the rights and privileges afforded to every citizen under the United States Constitution. This will be my answer to any further questions.
Mr. Trump, the focus of our investigation, what we are primarily going to cover today, involves the presentation of your statements of financial condition between 2011 and the present. I take it you are generally familiar with those statements. Is that correct?
For all of the reasons provided in my answer, which is incorporated herein, in its entirety, I decline to answer the question.
Shkreli, Trump, Shkreli. Here's the letter by New York Attorney General Letitia James to Justice Arthur Engoron. We write to provide the court with notice of supplemental authority. The recent Second Circuit decision in Federal Trade Communications v. Shkreli, Second Circuit, as the court is aware during closing arguments and included at page 131 of plaintiff's closing presentation, the Office of Attorney General cited to a federal judge's district court decision in the Shkreli case as case law in support of the relief sought by the Office of Attorney General in this action. Specifically, we cited that upon a finding violation under Executive Law Section 6312, a court may exercise its discretion to issue a permanent and plenary ban in a particular industry, citing Shkreli. In its appellate review, the Second Circuit unanimously affirmed in full the district court's order enjoining Martin Shkreli from participation in the pharmaceutical industry for life and ordering him to disgorge $64.6 million. A copy of the Second Circuit decision in the Shkreli case is not yet accessible on Westlaw, so we have attached a copy for the court's convenience to review. The federal judge also in the Shkreli case found the following, and this was affirmed by the Second Circuit. Given Shkreli's pattern of past misconduct, the obvious likelihood of its recurrence, and the life-threatening nature of its results, we are persuaded that the district court's determination as to the proper scope of the injunction was well within its discretion. So here, when Donald Trump inevitably appeals Justice Arthur Engoron's ruling, which we expect to be for the $370 million amount, and maybe also as well for post-judgment and pre-judgment interest, so we could be talking somewhere in the range of $450 to $500 million, I think that you'll have New York Attorney General Letitia James saying this was well within the discretion of Justice Engoron, given the obvious likelihood of recurrence and past misconduct, and this exact situation has been affirmed by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals as persuasive authority here. Interesting how the Shkreli appeal is now being utilized by New York Attorney General Letitia James. And as Justice Arthur Engoron said that he would be issuing his opinion at the end of January, it came just in time. So good news for Justice, bad news for Donald Trump, and waiting for that order by Justice Arthur Engoron. And I think he's always very prompt, so it comes on the day he says, end of January or even earlier.
It is Wednesday, the 24th of January of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, is the door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? No one. Will no one. And I'm looking at, the priests in the media. Some people call them scribes. But they seem to have been elevated to the lofty climes of priesthood. And one example of that would be Kornacki. Yeah, the guy wearing the khakis. And another one might be Abby Phillips. Over there on CNN. Yeah, if there's a way to bash Biden, those two will find a way. I was reminded of Kornacki going after Hillary when she had the flu. And he had a timeline. Remember that? Remember he had a timeline of, her sickness? He was at the big board. Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I know some people have thought that guy was kind of sexy. Maybe. I always thought he was, I don't know. I just never liked him. I never really trusted him. Well, if you're just breaking down numbers, that's one thing. But let's not forget, Luntz was just breaking down numbers too. That's right. Even Nate. Remember Nate? 538? He was just breaking down numbers. I think breaking down numbers might break your brain if you're not careful. Apparently. Well, speaking of numbers breaking people's brains, Joe Biden won a write-in vote. Not only, let's put it this way. He won 70% of the vote. He was not on the ballot. People had to stand in the weather to go write his name in. What's his face? Dropout Dean Phillips. Boy, was he screaming. He thinks with 23% that he's just on a tear. Yeah, tear it off and throw it away. But, so he and Abby Phillips think that Joe's just too old. The first party to get rid of us 80-year-olds will win. Yeah, we'll see about that. God, I hate ageism. I've hated it since I was a little kid. And I'll tell you why. Most of you know why, but I'll just remind folks. My dad literally wrote the text on old age politics, senior citizen rights. He hated those terms, senior citizen, old age. But, he even gave some consultation to the Gray Panthers when they first became a thing. So I was taught early, and I'll tell you why I was taught early, because as a little kid, you think that you're the center of the world and everything about being youthful is good, because I lived in the youthful generation. We had more kids than ever before in the history of the world. That's what we were told. And we bought things. And so marketing, propaganda, everything was geared towards us, the youth. The youth are the future. Yeah, get out of the way of the youth. Well, my dad sat me down and gave me a little history lesson, since he was a history professor, and he never did that. He would guide you to a book that you should read so you could fill yourself in, but he didn't think it appropriate, really, to give us his opinions, so directly. He did it by actions. Okay? You came to believe that what Dad was doing was right because you saw what he was doing. He didn't brag about it. He didn't say that this is the way it should be. But he did sit me down and actually gave me a lesson on ageism. How in our industrialized societies, it was really the first time that our old people were literally thrown away. Oh, we hear these lessons about more primitive cultures just leaving their old people for the bear to eat. It's not quite how it was. But they didn't throw their old people away. Their old people were considered to be a benefit to the society, not a liability. It was only when the Industrial Revolution occurred that old people who could not make it to the factory and produce, became a liability. And not everyone, because of our industrialized society, were living together on the farm where they could take care of each other. They were thrown about continents. So what do you do with those people? Just let them die? Throw them out in the wilderness and let the bear eat them? Give me a break. So when I hear these youngsters going off about old people, you got to get out of the way and give us a chance. How many times have we heard that before, and how many times did we say it? But there was another thing that was sort of imparted, is that there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy only occurs when it might happen to you or someone close. Empathy is essentially identifying or understanding one's plight without actually having to experience it. And I got to tell you, there was a value system there that was imparted as well, that empathy was higher on that gauge than sympathy. Apparently, kids today, and when I say kids, I mean kids under 50, do not trust anyone under 50. Remember when we were growing up, we heard the term, don't trust anyone over 30? Jeez, it's almost like don't trust anyone under 50 now. Young whippersnappers. But it does make me aware that apparently all those kids didn't get that lesson. Too woke, apparently. Well, I gotta tell you, ageism is the last refuge of a bigot. Always has, and it always will. Okay, what do we have in store for you here as we begin this Smothered Benedict Wednesdays here in the Bistro Cafe of this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Yes, at the top, Shkreli, Pharma Pro. That came down this morning. That decision, well, is now devastating news. And a devastating precedent against Donald Trump. Thank you. Thank you, Second Circuit. On the rest of the menu, Los Angeles County agreed to pay $5 million to the founder and CEO of a software company who was accused of stealing data on county poll workers in a case pushed by, you guessed it, conspiracy theorists and election deniers. Yeah, $5 million. He should have got more, I think. But, oh well. An Oregon jury awarded $85 million to 9 victims of the wildfires that ravaged the state in 2020. And it wasn't Antifa burning up there, like a lot of these MAGAs want to tell us. The power company. Yep, downed lines. They were responsible. But people died. They died. And another lawsuit has been filed against a small town in Mississippi by local black residents claiming cops engaged in systemic Jim Crow-like racial discrimination. Systemic. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where France fined Amazon $35 million for excessively intrusive monitoring of its warehouse staff. Big Brother, they don't like that over there. And an Italian Jewish leader slammed the use of a citation of Holocaust survivor Primo Levi by a group planning an anti-Israel protest on International Holocaust Remembrance Day this Saturday. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on, I don't know, how about an espresso type coffee drink? Well, if you could afford to send us those funds to us once a month, thus becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay our bills. And we have found over these many, many years that when we pay our bills, we're able to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance as the founders originally intended so many years ago. So thank you for your generosity, and thank you to those of you who might be so generous in the near future because the big bills come this time of year, I just got to tell you. Okay, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on all the social media platforms that you can imagine, well, yeah, I guess most of them. Anyway, you can do so by looking us up at Netroots Radio or, just Netroots Radio, depending. Tom takes care of that, and thank you, Tom. We all take care of Facebook, but Tom takes care of it, so there. You can also follow me on all those social media platforms at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime so people can have access to the actual reportage by the actual reporters. So you can do that by following my social media feeds. There you go. You can also follow the show on Twitter, such as it is, at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And I don't need to tell you, but I will anyway. Just can't get it on Stitcher. Where is it? Where's Stitcher? Yeah. Okay. I'm not giving it up. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by staff at the Associated Press. Los Angeles County yesterday, Tuesday, agreed to pay $5 million to the founder and CEO of a software company who was briefly accused of stealing data on county poll workers in a case he said was pushed by conspiracy theorists, and I might add, election deniers, because they say that later on in the article, but they should have said it here. The Board of Supervisors voted without public discussion to approve the settlement of a lawsuit filed by Eugene Yu of Michigan-based Konek Corp over his 2022 arrest and prosecution. County lawyers had urged approval of the settlement in a letter to the board. Konek is a small company based in East Lansing, Michigan. In 2020, it won a 5-year, $2.9 million contract with LA County for software to track election worker schedules, training, payroll, and communications. Yu was arrested in Michigan in October of 2022, and computer hard drives were seized. The LA County District Attorney's Office alleged that Konek had violated its contract requirement to keep data in the United States and improperly used servers in China to store information on hundreds of county poll workers. Yu and his company were charged with conspiracy to embezzle public funds and grand theft by embezzlement of public funds, and the case was dropped 37 days later. Yu sued the county, alleging the district attorney, George Gascon, had targeted him based on allegations of conspiracy theorists and election deniers. And after hours, email from the AP to the DA's office seeking comment was not immediately returned because when are they ever? Yu's attorney said that the utterly false charges and resulting publicity cost Mr. Yu his life savings and Konek over 50% of its customers. The lawsuit alleged that the prosecution of the company and Yu, who was born in China, was based on debunked conspiracy theories that the company secretly had ties to the Chinese Communist Party and supplied information as part of a Chinese campaign to manipulate votes. At one point, Yu received threats and went into hiding. After his arrest, which came about a month before the November 2022 general elections, the LA District Attorney's Office said the allegations only involved poll workers, not voting machines or vote counts, and did not alter election results. However, the office told NPR following Yu's arrest that the investigation began after a tip from Greg Phillips, an election denier associated with the controversial group True the Vote. Associated Press staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. An Oregon jury awarded $85 million to 9 victims of wildfires that ravaged the state in 2020. The latest verdict in a series of legal proceedings that are expected to put the utility Pacific Corp on the hook for billions of dollars over its liability for the deadly blazes. Oh, they're going to pass it on to us, the ratepayers. They always do. Pacific Corp expects post-verdict rulings and insurance payments to bring its share of the verdict to just under $80 million, the company said in a statement. The 2020 wildfires were undeniably tragic, it said. Pacific Corp has settled and will continue to settle all reasonable claims for actual damages under Oregon law. The growing threat of wildfires to communities and businesses is bigger than any one company or industry. The fires were among the worst natural disasters in Oregon's history, killing 9 people, burning more than 1,875 square miles, and destroying upward of 5,000 homes and other structures. Last June, a jury found Pacific Corp liable for damages for negligently failing to cut power to its 600,000 customers, despite warnings from top fire officials, saying its power lines were responsible for multiple blazes, and Pacific Corp has appealed. That jury awarded around $90 million to 17 homeowners and that were named as plaintiffs in the case, with damages to be determined later for a broader class that could include the owners of about 2,500 properties. The damages awarded yesterday, Tuesday, were the first in cases brought by that broader class, with additional trials expected in February and in April. Pacific Corp also agreed last month to pay $299 million to settle a lawsuit brought by 463 plaintiffs who were harmed by separate devastating wildfires in southern Oregon over Labor Day of 2020. This final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yet another lawsuit has been filed against a small town in Mississippi, its mayor, and former and current officers of the police department, with local black residents claiming cops engaged in systemic Jim Crow-like racial discrimination. On January 20th, 17 plaintiffs in Lexington, Mississippi, and nearby counties collectively filed a civil complaint against the city's police department, accusing officers of making false arrests, using excessive force, and intentionally trying to kill them. Lexington Police Department's tactics against black citizens are like those recommended for use by the United States Army to quell armed rioters in occupied nations. These tactics are wholly unnecessary on peaceful Americans, the lawsuit states. Unfortunately, the excessive force used is part of a pattern, practice, and custom of corruption, lawlessness, excessive force, false arrests, retaliation, and discrimination visited upon hundreds of black citizens. In July of 2022, local human advocacy organization named Julian spearheading the lawsuit against Lexington, leaked racist audio from the department's then chief, Sam Dobbins, in which he bragged about the number of times he shot a black man. Julian then sued the city of Lexington in August of 2022, demanding the protection of the city's black residents. The Mississippi chapter of the ACLU also sued the city of Lexington in August of 2023 and again in October, followed by an investigation into racism by the U.S. Department of Justice in November. According to the new lawsuit, Lexington police officers repeatedly harassed black residents in or near the city, including serving unjustified tickets and impounding cars on private property without search warrants, simply because of their race. In turn, this would cause black residents to miss days at work or repeatedly have to pay high fees that would continue to accumulate. In stark contrast, Defendant Dobbins never ordered property to be seized from Lexington's white communities and even reprimanded an officer when she attempted to tow a vehicle out of a white resident's yard, the lawsuit alleged. Okay, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, humor will set you free. Much like its protagonist, American Fiction doesn't fit neatly into any one box. Part dramedy, part satire, and part character study, the film tells the tale of Thelonious Monk Ellison, a writer and academic from an upper-middle-class background who declares he doesn't see race despite the fact that everyone else around him does. Monk, played by Jeffrey Wright, pens highbrow, well-reviewed novels that don't sell. Fed up with having his work grouped alongside bestsellers he views as exploitative and embodying the worst stereotypes of black culture, Monk decides to pen a novel in a similar vein just for fun. However, to his surprise, and that of his literary agent, the parody book not only becomes a bestseller, but also a critic's choice for its supposed rawness and authenticity. As a result, Monk has to juggle not only a new persona as a debut author with the ridiculous nom de pen Stag R. Lee, but he also has to evaluate who he really is and weigh his wanting to create so-called respectable art against his desire to make money from his craft. Add to this a subplot involving his tense relationships with his extensive family, and American Fiction could have easily crossed into melodrama. Luckily, screenwriter and debut director Cord Jefferson doesn't allow this. He handles everything with a deft hand, and as a result, the talents of Wright, Tracy Ellis Ross, Issa Rae, and Sterling K. Brown shine through with Jefferson's sharp-as-a-tack script. Indeed, the writing is so good that even the exacting, critical Monk would probably love it. American Fiction is easily one of the best films of the past year or so. Here's hoping it's not totally overlooked for awards. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to this edition of PCD Soundbites. I'm Karen Ngowe, filling in for your host, Latoya Simmons. Current guidelines recommend adults get at least 2.5 hours of moderate-intensity aerobic activity a week, like brisk walking. But many Americans don't get enough physical activity to meet this guideline, which can lead to chronic disease and premature death. Joining me today is Dr. Susan Carlson, a lead epidemiologist in CDC's Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity. We'll be discussing her research, which aims to estimate the percentage of U.S. deaths attributed to inadequate levels of physical activity. Thank you for being here, Susan.
Thank you for inviting me, Karen.
Susan, give us a brief overview of your study.
As Karen stated, the current aerobic physical activity guideline recommends that adults participate weekly in at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, or its equivalent for substantial health benefits. The health benefits include such things as lowering the risk of premature death, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancers, and depression. In our study, we first examined what influence physical activity levels below the current guideline have on premature mortality, and we wanted to look at whether this association differed by age. The second purpose was really to estimate the percentage of deaths that are attributable to levels of physical activity that are inadequate to meet the current guideline.
What did your research reveal about the association between inadequate physical activity and premature death among American adults?
So in a nationally representative sample of U.S. adults, we found that adults with levels of physical activity inadequate to meet current guidelines had an increased risk of premature death. Overall, we found that 8.3% of deaths were attributed to inadequate levels of physical activity. Our findings suggest that if you increase adults' physical activity levels to meet the current guidelines, this is likely one way to reduce the risk of premature death in the United States.
What did you find when you looked at this association in different age groups?
We did not find a significant association between physical activity level and mortality in adults aged 25 to 39. However, for those aged 40 to 69 and 70 or older, we found that not meeting the guideline was associated with an increased risk of premature mortality.
How did these findings compare to previous similar studies?
We found that our estimates were similar or slightly lower when comparing to similar studies that have examined this association. In general, our estimates of the percent of deaths attributable to inadequate levels of physical activity is not practically different from other studies.
Do you think researchers have become better at estimating the percentage of deaths attributed to inadequate physical activity?
Estimating the percentage can be challenging. Many of the previous studies that have provided these estimates have done so by combining estimates across different sources. This can really bias results, especially if there are differences in the populations or if the physical activity measure differs. When you use a survival analysis conducted in a single population, which is what we did in this study, you can overcome a lot of these biases and improve your estimates. Facilitating the linking of CDC survey data from systems like the National Health Interview Survey to mortality data can really help researchers explore these issues.
How do you think this research can be used to help get adults moving and reduce the risk of premature death associated with inadequate physical activity?
So we found in this study that a significant portion of deaths were attributed to lower levels of physical activity. By estimating the public health burden of low levels of physical activity, this can be important for setting research and program priorities and for public health planning at the national, state, and local level. Ultimately, individuals make the decision to be active. However, this decision can be made easier by programs and policies that provide opportunities for physical activity and by making communities more activity-friendly. By working collaboratively across different sectors, communities across the nation can help to increase physical activity levels and potentially reduce the risk of premature death.
Thank you, Susan. You can read her study, Percentage of Deaths Associated with Inadequate Physical Activity in the United States, online at cdc.gov/PCD. The findings and conclusions in this report are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the official position of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt, and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. We reported January 16th on a federal court finding that maps drawn by Michigan's Independent Citizen Redistricting Commission diluted black voting power and must be redrawn. An appeal to keep the existing maps was declined Monday by the U.S. Supreme Court. Michigan voters created the Independent Commission in 2018 through a constitutional referendum to put an end to gerrymandering. Detroit civil rights groups objected to the commission's proposed maps during 2021 hearings, but the MICRC's consultants concluded the districts met Federal Voting Rights Act guidelines. A federal court panel disagreed, finding that the commission diluted black majority districts. The court ordered 13 Greater Detroit House districts be redrawn by February 2nd and 6 Senate maps by April. The MICRC asked the U.S. Supreme Court to stay the order, but SCOTUS declined on January 22nd. But there's an interesting partisan twist to the story. 19 black voters representing 13 districts were plaintiffs in the case. The Michigan Advance reports that they were represented by a Republican former Solicitor General for the state of Michigan. And it was mostly white conservative suburbs that were redistricted with largely black, more liberal Detroit neighborhoods. Michigan's House is composed of 56 Democrats and 54 Republicans, and all are up for re-election in 2024. We have more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1874. That was the day Arturo Alfonso Schomburg was born. Schomburg was an important figure in the Harlem Renaissance. He is also considered a premier historian and collector of material on black life in America. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, he arrived in the United States in 1891 and soon settled into the Cuban and Puerto Rican working class neighborhoods of New York City. Schomburg initially involved himself in the Cuban and Puerto Rican independence movements. When he traveled to New Orleans, he experienced Jim Crow discrimination and witnessed black disenfranchisement firsthand. He reacted strongly to the increased racial tensions, lynchings, and race riots of the period, and believed that history must restore what slavery took away. In 1911, Schomburg and his friend John Edward Bruce founded the Negro Society for Historical Research and established lasting friendships with intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois. He worked for the inclusion of black history into the educational system and continued to amass a wide collection of literature, art, books, pamphlets, and manuscripts on black life and history. His collection spanned materials from across the globe. It included letters of Haitian revolutionary Toussaint Louverture, poetry by Phyllis Wheatley, artifacts from Frederick Douglass, and other black leaders. Schomburg's private collection became the basis for the 135th Street Benedict branch of the New York Public Library's Division of Negro Literature, History, and Prints, which opened in 1925. The division served as a pivotal resource for Harlem Renaissance writers, poets, and artists. Known today as the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, it is recognized as the leading repository for materials and artifacts on Black cultural life. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We apologize for the top of the show not being broadcast at its usual time. We had a bit of a snafu here, but you'll be able to get the whole show, including the weather and news from around the world, on the podcast, which will be posted later. So look out for that. Yeah, look out. We'll post it on Daily Coast and then try to get it up on social media for you. And that'll just be a little bit later. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Under foggy and rainy conditions, expecting highs in the low 50s. We will be cloudy with showers throughout the day. Winds will be light and variable, looking at about a quarter inch of rain today, then cloudy with showers tonight. Lows in the low 40s, winds light and variable, and it looks like we're going to get something a little less than a quarter inch. And then sunshine and clouds tomorrow with highs in the low to mid-50s, winds light and variable, and then we'll have rain later on in the day into the evening. But it looks like we'll have some sun during the day tomorrow. Pollen is rated as none here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 15 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.92 inches. Visibility is around 1 mile, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 52 degrees and mostly cloudy. Paris is 56 and partly cloudy. Rome is 58 and clear. Bagram is 35 and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 34 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 48 and fair. Tokyo is 35 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 65 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 38 with rain, and they are under a winter weather advisory. And New York is 44 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. At the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. France's privacy watchdog said that it slapped Amazon's French warehouse business with a $35 million U.S. fine for using an excessively intrusive system to monitor worker performance and activity. The French Data Protection Authority, also known by its acronym CNIL, said the system allowed managers at Amazon France Logistique to track employees so closely that it resulted in multiple breaches of the EU's stringent privacy rules called the General Data Protection Regulation.
We strongly disagree with CNIL's conclusions, which are factually incorrect, and we reserve the right to appeal,
Amazon said in an accent totally made up on the spot.
Warehouse management systems are industry standard and are necessary for ensuring the safety, quality, and efficiency of operations, and to track the storage of inventory and processing of packages on time and in line with customer expectations.
The watchdog's investigation focused on Amazon employees' use of handheld barcode scanners to track packages at various points as they move through the warehouse, such as putting them in crates or packing them for delivery. Seattle-based Amazon uses the system to manage its business and meet performance targets, but the regulator said it is different from traditional methods for monitoring worker activity and puts them under close surveillance and continuous pressure. The watchdog said the scanner, known as a Stow machine gun, allows the company to monitor employees to the nearest second because they signal an error if items are scanned too quickly in less than 1.25 seconds. The system is used to measure employee productivity as well as periods of inactivity. But under EU privacy rules, it is illegal to set up a system measuring work interruptions with such accuracy, potentially requiring employees to justify every break or interruption, the watchdog said. CNIL also chastised Amazon for keeping employee data for too long, saying it did not need every detail of the data generated by the scanners from the past month because real-time data and weekly statistics were enough.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Colleen Berry of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An Italian Jewish leader yesterday, Tuesday, protested a citation of Holocaust survivor Primo Levi on flyers for a planned pro-Palestinian demonstration in the Italian capital of Milan this coming Saturday that just happens to coincide with International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Leave Primo Levi to our memory, Naomi De Segni, head of the Union of Italian Jewish Communities, was quoted by the news agency ANSA as saying, "Have the dignity to show your thoughts without offending the memory of a survivor and find other citations." A poster for the pro-Palestinian demonstration includes a reference to a Levi quote about the need to remember because what happened could happen again, but used to implicitly refer to Gaza, not the Holocaust, as Levy wrote. The incident exemplified De Segni's concerns expressed at a news conference in Rome earlier in the day that the memory of the Holocaust was being used out of context, abused, turned against Israel or the Jews. She noted that we have heard distorted words from rectors, teachers, politicians, and institutional figures. Given the rise in anti-Semitic sentiment around the Israel-Hamas war, Desegni acknowledged a temptation for Italy's Jewish communities to observe Remembrance Day privately, but said that a schedule of hundreds of events would go ahead mostly as planned out of duty. Despite the Italian government's assurance that it would provide maximum security, plans to hold traditional marathon foot races in several Italian cities to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day on Saturday were canceled. Security was organized, but for this year, it seems impossible to think of running in the streets of Italy, she said, noting with irony that those who raise their arms in a fascist salute are almost always protected by constitutional freedoms. She cited fascist salutes at a recent far-right rally in Rome, as well as a high court ruling last week that the fascist salute is not a crime unless it risks sparking violence or is aimed at reviving the fascist party. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.